Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, is there anyone out there who doesn't feel a little like they've been fleeced by the CBC? If you're a taxpayer in this country, you're being forced to fund a media organization that feels entitled to your money. And more often than not, it gives you a finger in return. The CBC is that bratty kid. Maybe this is your child, I hope not. But the CBC is that bratty kid who has their hand out, demanding more and more, while constantly telling you how terrible you are. And what does it do with our hard-earned cash? It paints the Canadian public, especially conservatives, as a bunch of racist, transphobic, Islamophobic bigots. And now, as if that wasn't enough, the Trudeau government wants to double the handout, sending us all the bill for their entitled, virtue-signaling, woke media empire. And what's even more galling is that they've taken this sense of entitlement and rebranded it as love. Yes, folks, love. Heritage Minister Pascal Saint-Onge had the audacity to claim that our love for Canadian culture and unity will be proven by a funding boost to the CBC. How exactly? By forcing taxpayers to fork out more money to fund this bloated, partisan behemoth? Apparently, according to Saint-Onge, anything less is a betrayal of Canadian identity, unpatriotic even. Now, you might be wondering, how on earth is it unpatriotic to not want to fund an organization that consistently undermines the very values of the people it's supposed to serve? Saint-Onge's plan is to double the CBC's budget to a jaw-dropping $60 per person. A lot of people would think of better ways to spend their $60, I think, like, say, putting it toward affordable health care, lower taxes, keeping it in their own pockets. But no, we're supposed to shell it out for an institution that regularly insults our values, attacks our freedoms, especially freedom of speech, and somehow they call it public service. Now Saint-Onge claims that this is all in response to foreign influence, especially from tech oligarchs down south. The CBC's survival is apparently a national security issue, according to Saint-Onge. Really? National security? Let's put this in perspective. The CBC, this crown jewel of the Canadian media landscape, is bleeding us dry while it pushes the Liberal agenda. And its defenders have the gall to claim that defunding it would somehow hand a victory to foreign powers like YouTube, Netflix, and TikTok. So instead of pointing fingers at big tech, maybe Saint-Onge should take a good hard look at her own backyard. The CBC is an embarrassment, and its continuous liberal-flavored content is a slap in the face to Canadians, especially conservative Canadians, who want a balanced, honest media. Let's face it, the CBC has long ceased to be a neutral, objective broadcaster that it once claimed to be. Now it's little more than a mouthpiece for the government, pushing out pro-liberal narratives and spinning every story in a way that suits their agenda. When was the last time you heard the CBC speak truthfully about the Liberal government's countless scandals? They're too busy cozying up to the Liberals, shoveling out woke talking points about gender ideology, climate change, intersectionality. And they want to do this with our money. Absolutely not. If we need a reminder of how far the CBC has strayed from its original purpose, look no further than its coverage of anything related to conservatism. They have no problem branding anyone with a traditional viewpoint as extremist or dangerous, and they're doing it with our money. You know, as if holding on to common sense values makes you a villain in this country. What does this love for Canadian culture look like in reality? A lot of it seems to be about protecting the Liberal establishment's grip on power, while continuing to push divisive left-wing talking points. It's an outrage that as taxpayers, we're on the hook for this kind of one-sided media propaganda. They've essentially turned our tax dollars into a perpetual slush fund for their biased reporting, and they'll keep doing it as long as they can. The CBC's executives who, let's be clear, are making millions, they're still out there collecting bonuses and congratulating themselves for cutting staff. Meanwhile, they're filling our screens with more identity politics and far-left rhetoric than anyone could stomach. And then there's the hypocrisy. The CBC claims it needs this funding to compete against global giants like Netflix and YouTube. But isn't that the same argument that's used to push for the government to regulate those very same platforms? The irony is staggering. The CBC can't compete on a level playing field, so it demands more of our money to survive. And of course, what happens when you give the CBC more money? They waste it. They spend it on bloated salaries, executive bonuses, and their own version of the cultural revolution. And all of this while their programming gets less and less relevant to Canadians who are tired of being lectured by entitled elites. The reality is most Canadians are waking up to the fact that the CBC isn't serving them. It's serving the government. It's making us pay for it. If you don't believe that, just take a look at their track record. The CBC's version of news is about as reliable as a fortune cookie. They don't just report on events, they shape the narrative. Whether it's downplaying the failures of the Trudeau government or pushing woke policies that no one asked for, the CBC is constantly bending over backward to push an agenda that doesn't reflect the will of the Canadian people. Instead, they've become an ideological echo chamber, repeating the same tired left-wing talking points day in and day out. So what does a real investment in Canadian culture look like? It's certainly not throwing more taxpayer money at the CBC, hoping it will suddenly transform into something that serves Canadians rather than the liberal elite. It's about empowering independent media, supporting local journalism, encouraging a diversity of voices that reflect the full spectrum of Canadian society. And by diversity, I mean a diversity of ideas, the only kind of diversity that matters. Canadians don't need more state-run media. What they need is less government interference and more freedom of choice in the marketplace of ideas. The CBC isn't saving Canadian culture, it's suffocating it. Now let's talk about Pierre Poilievre for a second, because unlike Saint-Onge and the Liberals, he actually understands the CBC has become a bloated, taxpayer-funded mess. He's made defunding the CBC a core part of his platform. He has the guts to stand up and say what so many Canadians are thinking of, that the CBC is a waste of our money, it doesn't deserve a billion-dollar handout, never mind 2 times that. Instead of throwing more money at this media dinosaur, we need to end its stranglehold on Canadian broadcasting and let Canadians decide what media they want to consume. If the CBC wants to survive in a digital age, let it compete in the free market like everyone else. If it can't, that's its problem, not ours. The future of the CBC is on the line in the upcoming federal election, and if the Liberals win, we're going to be stuck with more of the same, an endless cycle of wasteful spending, biased reporting, and more taxpayer money being flushed down the drain. But if Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have their way, the CBC's days of being an untouchable taxpayer-funded empire might be over. And frankly, that would be a huge win for Canadian taxpayers. So let's stop pretending the CBC is a national treasure or a pillar of democracy. It's time to pull the plug on this government-funded media giant and let Canadians decide for themselves what programming they want to watch. Hey, this is Richard Syrett. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe.